In the previous video, we deployed a simple greeter contract on testnet Sepolia and Optimism testnet Sepolia. And then we sent a message from L1 to L2. And as you can see here, if I scroll down, here's the L1 contract and here's the L2 contract. We sent a transaction from the L1 contract over to the L2 contract and then set the greetings to hello L2. In this video, we'll send a transaction the other way. We'll send a transaction from L2 and then call the contract on L1. For this video, we'll be using the same contracts, and here are the contract addresses. Here are the steps that we'll need to follow to send the transaction from L2 to L1. We first call the L2 greeter contract and then call this function send, this function over here. And next, we'll need to switch network, and then on testnet Sepolia on L1, we'll need to prove our message. We do this by calling the function optimism portal.prove withdrawal transaction. Now, we're not going to directly call this contract and function. What we'll need to do is use the Optimism npm library and then run the script. Next, we'll need to wait a challenge period. On the mainnet, this is 7 days. However, on testnet, I think this is like 1 second. And then the final step is to call the contract optimism portal again, and then call the function finalize withdrawal transaction. When we call this function, it's going to execute our transaction to call the greeter contract on L1. And just like in step 2, we're not going to directly call the contract and the function. We'll again use the Optimism npm library to call this function. Okay, so the first step is to call the L2 greeter contract and then call the function send. And for review, the function send will take in a string of greetings, and then it's going to relay our greetings message over to the messenger contract also on L2. After we follow all of these steps outlined over here, our message will be relayed over to our L1 contract. So we'll click on the deployment tab, and then I've already loaded the L1 and L2 contract over here. The first one is the L1 contract, and the second one is the L2 contract. Make sure that you're on Optimism Sepolia testnet, and then scroll down, and then we'll call the function send. For the message, let's say hello L1. Click on send. Confirm the transaction. Okay, that completes step 1. For steps 2 to 4, we'll write a node script and then call these function prove withdrawal transaction and finalize withdrawal transaction. I wrote a simple node script which we will execute to relay our L2 transaction onto L1. I went to Optimism documentation and basically copied the code from here. Okay, back inside my code editor, the first thing that we need to do is install some npm packages, which I have here inside package.json. If you look at this, what you'll need to install is called @eth optimism /SDK and also ethers.js. Here you need to make sure that ethers.js is not version 6. You need to make sure that it is version 5. Okay, with these two packages installed, let's go back to our node script. This script is going to get the private key and the L2 transaction hash from process emp. We're going to set an environment variable for private key and L2 transaction hash. Next, I defined some constants that we'll need to make some calls to both L1 and L2. L1 RPC, L2 RPC, and L1 chain ID and L2 chain ID. These configurations are used inside the main script to initialize the L1 provider, L2 provider, and L1 and L2 wallets. Okay, the next step is to initialize the messenger by passing in chain IDs and L1 and L2 wallet. All of this is documented inside the official documentation of Optimism. Okay, the next step is to wait for L2 transaction, wait until it is ready to prove, and then next is the interesting part. It calls messenger.prove message. And then for the input, we're going to pass in the L2 transaction hash. Now what this code will do under the hood is it's going to call the Optimism portal contract. Remember back inside our remix, we said that for step 2, we'll need to call optimism portal.prove withdrawal transaction. This code over here is doing exactly that. It's sending a transaction to Optimism portal and then calling the function prove withdrawal transaction. And then on the next line, after we prove our message, what we're doing here is we're waiting for the challenge period to elapse. On the mainnet, the challenge period is 7 days. However, on the testnet, it's a lot shorter, and I think it's like 1 second. Once we wait the challenge period, the next code is messenger.finalize message. This will correspond to step 4 that we outlined. So back inside Remix, I mentioned earlier that step 4 is finalize message on L1. And we do this by calling Optimism portal.finalize withdrawal transaction. This is what this line of code is doing. And after this transaction is processed, we've successfully relayed our transaction from L2 to L1. Okay, let's run the script. We're going to need a transaction hash of L2 transaction and a private key. I'll get my private key from my MetaMask, but I won't be showing you my private key. For the L2 transaction hash, we'll go back to Remix and then get it from there. So here it is, the L2 transaction hash. This transaction is from when we call the function send on the greeter contract deployed on L2. So this transaction hash is the L2 transaction hash. I'll copy this and then back inside our script, I'm going to open my terminal and then say L2 TX equal to, and then paste the L2 transaction hash. I've stored my private key in a .env file, so we'll load it when we execute the node script. So say env cat.env. This will load my private key when the node script is executed. And then we'll also load the environment variable L2tx. We'll say L2tx is equal to the environment variable L2tx. And then we'll execute the script by typing node source index.js. Okay, the script ran successfully. Let's go back to Remix and then check the L1 contract. Back inside Remix, make sure that you're on testnet Sepolia on L1. The greeting message was sent to this account, so I'll copy this account and then scroll down and then open the L1 greeter contract and then scroll down and then paste my address and then call greetings. And we get the message, hello L1. This is the message that we sent from the L2 contract. In this video, we sent a transaction from L2 contract over to L1. And the way we did it was by first executing a transaction on L2, and this transaction was relayed over to the messenger contract on L2. Next, there were several steps that we had to do on L1. First was to call prove withdrawal transaction on the contract Optimism portal on L1. And then we had to wait for the challenge period. And then finally, we execute the transaction on L1 by calling the contract Optimism portal and then calling the function finalize withdrawal transaction. This executed the greeter contract on L1, call the function set, and set our greetings. We now have all the experience and the tool to send ETH from L1 to L2 and from L2 to L1. So we'll cover this in the next video.